When Luo Li's slender figure appeared next to Mu Chun, the overwhelming sword qi in the sky swiftly retracted, finally disappearing into her body. However, the broken mountain peak, split into two halves, still stood as proof of just how sharp the sword qi had been. Luo Li is out of seclusion. Su Huang and the others looked at Luo Li with joy, finally breathing a sigh of relief. Mu Chen's gaze was similarly surprised as he looked at the graceful young woman standing beside him. He could naturally sense the faint pressure of spiritual energy emanating from Luo Li's body. That sense of oppression was far stronger than before. Have you passed the spiritual energy tribulation? Mu Chen asked in astonishment. Luo Li smiled and lightly nodded her head. Mu Chen remained silent, feeling somewhat frustrated. It seemed that he was always a step behind Luo Li. Though spiritual energy cultivation didn't necessarily equate to battle power, every time he made a breakthrough, thinking he could finally match her, she too would break through and leave him behind. It seems you won't surpass me so easily, Luo Li said, noticing the slight frustration on Mu Chen's face. A playful glint flashed in her clear eyes, and she proudly lifted her delicate chin. Though she was usually as serene as a lotus, only in front of Mu Chun did she display such a typical, playful attitude. Mu Chen shot her a glare and said, "Don't provoke me, or even if you've passed the spiritual energy tribulation, I'll still spank you." Luo Li's fair face flushed with a slight pink. Her voice, crisp and pleasant, carried a hint of embarrassment. Pervert. If anyone else had dared to speak so brazenly to her, they would have probably been pierced by her sword by now. But in front of Mu Chun, she could only glare at him with a mix of annoyance and charm. So captivating it was. Humph. From above, Chen Xi, watching the flirtatious exchange between the two without receiving a single glance, felt his anger intensify. He coldly said, "Mu Chun, are you really not going to hand over the wood god token?" Mu Chun turned his head and glanced at him. Then, with a slight motion of his hand, the divine wood steel appeared in his grasp. He raised it and asked, "Are you talking about this?" When Chen Xi saw the divine wood steel in Mu Chen's hand, his eyes lit up with greed. He licked his lips and said, "Hand it over, and I won't make things difficult for you. This isn't something you should have." Mu Chen smiled and shook his head, replying softly, "I refuse." "You." Chen Xi's face turned red with anger. Clearly realizing that Mu Chun was mocking him, he sneered, "Mu Chun, I advise you not to deceive yourselves. Although you come from the 5 great academies, in this spiritual academy grand competition, it's the alliance of academies that calls the shots. If you truly anger us, you won't even have the chance to withdraw from the competition." Alliance of academies? Mu Chun raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" He shook his head, his expression slowly turning colder. "Since you don't want to leave on your own, then stay here. All of you, attack together. Take them down." Chen Xi was furious at Mu Chen's attitude. Did this guy really think their small team could defeat over 30 of them? As his command rang out, he formed hand seals, and a torrent of powerful spiritual energy erupted like a storm. It then condensed in front of him into a massive stone tablet, radiating blinding light, adorned with mysterious patterns, accompanied by a peculiar wave of energy. Behind Chen Xi, dozens of experts also shouted, their overwhelming spiritual energy surging forth, turning into streaks of light that rushed into the stone tablet. Boom. As such immense spiritual energy flooded in, the glowing stone tablet swelled up like a storm, rapidly growing to 1,000 feet tall. Its massive shadow engulfed the surrounding area, casting a dark pall over the landscape. The oppressive spiritual energy reverberated, causing the entire sky to darken. "I want to see what qualifications you have to talk about leaving us." Divine steel of heaven suppression. Chen Xi's face turned pale as he struggled to control the stone tablet, now empowered by the combined force of many. His gaze became cold as he locked eyes with Mu Chun and the others, shouting, "You can't escape this." Luo Li raised her delicate face, gazing at the luminous stone tablet. This person does have some skill, being able to channel others' spiritual energy into his attack. As soon as her voice fell, she held the Luo god's sword in her hand, moving gracefully with light steps. Then, with a flick of her jade hand, a sword beam like the Milky Way shot straight up into the sky. As the sword light condensed, it seemed to transform into a massive shadow of a sword beam, and a sharp, unmatched sword intent spread out, wreaking havoc across the heavens and earth. In an instant, the peak of the mountain was left riddled with holes. Luo got sword shadow. Luo Li's slender, fair jade hand pointed into the air, and the giant sword shadow immediately howled, then flashed across the sky like lightning. In the blink of an eye, it collided fiercely with the glowing stone steel that was suppressing it. Boom! An overwhelming fluctuation of spiritual energy swept across the sky, as the sword shadow's tip stabbed into the bottom of the steel. The two exploded in a powerful shockwave, each desperately trying to devour the other. Mu Chen looked up at the scene, smiling faintly. He then stomped his foot heavily on the ground, causing cracks to spread, and his body shot into the sky like lightning. His form appeared under the sword shadow in an instant, and he threw a punch. SSS. Black lightning coiled around his fist, with faint sounds of thunder rumbling. The space around him seemed to twist slightly, and at that moment, Mu Chen, having successfully overcome the physical body tribulation, was now wielding a terrifying level of power. Boom! Mu Chen's fist, wrapped in black lightning, struck the sword shadow. The terrifying power erupted like a tidal wave, and the sword shadow let out a long cry. With a swish, it used the force to pierce through the stone steel. Bang! The sword shadow pierced through the steel, flying towards the sky. The steel cracked rapidly, and with a final bang, it shattered into countless light points. Pfft. As the steel exploded, dozens of experts immediately turned pale, vomiting blood. Chen Xi, in particular, was the first to be hit. His spiritual energy burst open, and his body was violently thrown back several hundred feet, blood pouring from his mouth. His spiritual energy fluctuations immediately weakened, clearly suffering severe injury. He struggled to steady himself, his eyes filled with shock. He couldn't believe that the combined assault of dozens of them was easily broken by Mu Chen and Luo Li working together. These young men and women were so terrifying. No wonder they were so fearless even when facing their formidable lineup. It turned out that they hadn't regarded them as any threat at all. Retreat. Chen Xi wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, gritted his teeth, and decisively ordered a hasty retreat. The current situation was beyond their control. It seemed they had greatly underestimated the combat strength of Mu Chen's team. The other three members of the team were not to be feared, but Mu Chen and Luo Li were incredibly terrifying. Based on Chen Xi's estimate, Mu Chen and Luo Li's strength could likely rival the leaders of their alliance of academies. Mu Chen, this time you've won, but don't get too smug. Next time our alliance of academies comes after you, you may not have a chance to resist. Chen Xi and the others retreated in a sorry state, their reluctant shouts echoing in the distance. Mu Chen gazed indifferently at their retreat, not making any move to stop them. Why did you let them go? Su Huang and the others were somewhat puzzled. If Mu Chen had truly wanted to, he could have easily kept Chen Xi and the others from escaping. Mu Chen did not answer them. Instead, he turned his head, his expression becoming particularly solemn as he looked towards the distant mountain peak. Luo Li also turned her head, her beautiful eyes gazing in the same direction. She spoke softly, because there are uninvited guests here. Compared to them, the people from before aren't a threat. Su Huang and the others' faces immediately changed, their eyes widening in horror as they scanned their surroundings. Was there a stronger team lurking here, watching them? Mu Chen's gaze grew even more serious as he focused on the distant mountains. Then, his voice, filled with immense spiritual energy, echoed like thunder across the sky. A few of you, you've been watching long enough. It's time to show yourselves. From that direction, he could vaguely sense an intense pressure, a sensation he had never felt since arriving at the Spiritual Academy Grand Competition. Clearly, it seemed like they were being targeted by truly formidable figures. Under Mu Chen's intense gaze, suddenly, a flash of light appeared from that direction, and within a few breaths, several figures appeared in the sky above them. In the sky, the light faded, and 5 graceful and captivating figures slowly emerged. The 5 girls all possessed remarkable beauty, especially the one in the front. Her golden battle armor outlined her slender, delicate frame, and her long, snow-white neck, graceful like a swan, shimmered. Her hair cascaded like a waterfall, and beneath her golden skirt, her long and straight gleamed, so dazzling that one couldn't tear their eyes away. Su Huang and the others stood frozen for a moment, staring at this girl. Then their gazes couldn't help but brighten, as this was the first time they had seen a girl of their age whose appearance and temperament were on par with Luo Li's. As expected of the infamous blood calamity of Spirit Road. It's a pleasure to meet you for the first time. I'm Wen Xian, the girl in golden battle armor, beautiful like a female war god, smiled as she looked at Mu Chun, her red lips curling slightly. Wen Xian. As soon as they heard the name, the astonishment in Su Huang's eyes disappeared entirely, replaced by a look of shock. The girl before them was the captain of the team that had long held the first place, Wen Xian, the Blood God clan, one of the 4 divine clans of the Western Heaven Realm. Back at Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy, a Blood God clan member named Xue Tiandu had once discovered Luo Li. Though Xue Tiandu was ultimately heavily wounded by Mu Chun, the information about Luo Li was taken back, and considering Luo Li's importance to the Luo God clan, if the Blood God clan learned of this, they would certainly take action. So, upon seeing these Blood God clan members, Mu Chun's gaze grew slightly cold. The Western Heaven Realm was extremely far from here. Even supreme beings would require significant time to travel. Therefore, he didn't believe that the appearance of the Blood God clan members here was a coincidence. These people were definitely after Luo Li. His gaze locked like a blade on the figure in blood robes on the distant mountain peak. Finally, his eyes focused on the person in the front of the 10 figures, a young man standing with his hands behind his back. He was also dressed in blood robes, but there were thin golden patterns on the cuffs, exuding a sense of nobility. His status, clearly, was somewhat different. This young man in golden patterned blood robes had a handsome face, with lips that were particularly crimson. At this moment, he too was looking at Mu Chun and the others, though more precisely, his gaze was fixed on Luo Li. He smiled faintly, nodded with elegance, and in a soft voice said, "Luo Li, I've finally found you." Luo Li's beautiful eyes locked onto the handsome young man, her jade-like hand slowly clenching. Her voice, clear yet laced with a chill, came through. "Xue Tiandu, I didn't expect you, the 4th prince of the Blood God clan, to appear here. You remember me? That really makes me happy." The handsome young man, Xue Tiandu, smiled as he spoke. With a wave of his sleeve, several figures leapt forward, and beneath their feet, blood energy surged, releasing a faint scent of blood that stirred the spiritual energy within the bodies of those present. Mu Chun remained expressionless, while Su Huang and the others immediately activated their spiritual energy, warily watching the hostile group. The Blood God clan. When Xingxuan's phoenix eyes briefly glanced at Xue Tiandu, her gaze flashing slightly. Xue Tiandu stopped a short distance from Luo Li. His eyes scanned the surroundings, lingering on Mu Chun and Wen Xian for a moment, clearly sensing some unusual fluctuations of spiritual energy from both. A year ago, Xue Tiandu sent back word that you appeared at Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. That caused quite a stir. Hee, you are the next emperor of the Luo God clan, and their only hope for the future. If we capture you, the Luo God clan will fall into despair. I imagine even Luo Heavenly God will suffer a heavy blow, Xue Tiandu said with a faint smile. That's why I was sent. The Blood God clan certainly holds you in high regard, Luo Li said coldly. Luo Li, come with me. The Western Heaven Realm is in constant turmoil, and the Luo God clan is retreating step by step. If you join the Blood God clan, I'll request marriage from my people. Then you'll marry me, and our 2 clans will no longer be enemies. The other 2 divine clans will also be eradicated. By then, the Western Heaven Realm will belong to us, and your Luo God clan will be preserved. Xue Tiandu's handsome face seemed to show a tender and hopeful smile as he looked at Luo Li. This will save how many of your people from death? Luo Li's jade hand gripped her Luo God sword tightly, and a cold glint flashed in her beautiful eyes. But before she could speak, Mu Chun took a step forward, smiling at Xue Tiandu. Sorry, this flower is already taken. Besides, with your character, if you want to become the great hero of the Blood God clan, you're still a bit lacking. A cold glint flickered in the depths of Xue Tiandu's eyes. He turned to Mu Chun, his tone faint. And who are you? You can't understand what he's saying. Luo Li said dundundud, her voice as calm as ever. Xue Tiandu's pupils slightly constricted, and the cold, sinister gaze he fixed on Mu Chun finally turned icy and filled with malice. His crimson lips curled into a mocking smile as he spoke. Luo Li, you've truly surprised me. Countless talented young men with impressive backgrounds in the Western Heaven Realm are infatuated with you. yet you've paid them no mind. Instead, you came to this small Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy and fell for someone like this? Do you even realize the kind of trouble this will cause for your Luo God clan if this news gets back to the Western Heaven Realm? You must be aware that many factions in the Western Heaven Realm have their eyes on you, the future empress of the Luo God clan. His tone was cold, with an undeniable anger and jealousy toward Mu Chun. Clearly, Luo Li admitting to such a thing stirred some emotions in him. My matters are none of your concern. If you want to target the Luo God clan, just go ahead and make your move. Over the years, have your various vile schemes not been enough? Even if the Luo God clan is destroyed, we can still heavily damage your Blood God clan's vitality. At that point, your Blood God clan will follow the same fate as us. Luo Li responded coldly. Xue Tiandu's handsome face turned grim. Slowly, he said, "Since you are so stubborn, I guess I'll have to forcefully take you back to the Western Heaven Realm." Upon hearing this, Mu Chun simply smiled, but there was an unmistakable chill in his expression. Dark lightning flickered across his body, and his cold gaze locked onto Xue Tiandu. "I think," Mu Chun said, "you should be worrying less about how to take me and more about whether or not you can even make it back alive." Oh, a crimson light flashed in Xue Tiandu's eyes, and a mocking smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "What an arrogant fool. With just your physical body tribulation strength, you dare to threaten me?" Mu Chun grinned, and with a powerful stomp, his figure shot forward like a bolt of lightning. Locking onto Xue Tiandu, his eyes burned with murderous intent. Earlier, when Xue Tiandu dared to use the Luo God clan to force Luo Li, that had truly enraged him. At this moment, as a man, Mu Chun had no need to waste words with Xue Tiandu. His only course of action was to act directly. Seeking death. The few figures behind Xue Tiandu, cloaked in blood robes, moved to intervene when they saw Mu Chun rushing toward them, but Xue Tiandu stopped them with a raised hand. His handsome face now showed signs of bloodlust. In this moment, he didn't need anyone else to interfere. As the prince of the Blood God clan, his pride would not allow such blatant provocation. With a slight tap of his toes, a blood mist surged from his body, and his form transformed into a streak of blood-red light that shot out like lightning. Boom! The blood light exploded in an instant, enveloping the sky in a blood-red hue. Xue Tiandu's crimson eyes locked onto Mu Chun, and he changed his seal. His palm shot forward, his voice ringing out across the sky. Blood God Palm. A massive blood-colored palm materialized, roaring downward with terrifying force, shaking the space and distorting it slightly. In the distance, Su Huang and the others, upon seeing the power of Xue Tiandu's palm, couldn't help but change their expressions. Though Xue Tiandu was detestable, his strength was undeniably overwhelming. That strike was so powerful that even someone at the level of a typical spiritual energy tribulation expert would have to avoid it. This guy's strength is insane. Pin Air murmured, watching Xue Tiandu's aura. "Do you think Mu Chun can withstand it?" Luo said anxiously. "Xue Tiandu does indeed have some ability." When Chen Xi raised an eyebrow, and then said calmly, "But don't underestimate Mu Chun. This guy is hiding more than you think." As both sides watched intently, the blood-colored palm descended, sealing off all of Mu Chun's escape routes. But at this moment, Mu Chun stopped in his tracks. He gazed up at the roaring blood palm, his eyes suddenly filling with coldness. With a swift motion, he formed hand seals. Chi-chi. As the hand seals rapidly changed, black lightning surged around Mu Chun's body, intensifying. The lightning flickered wildly as 4 runes swiftly formed on his chest, each one imbued with powerful force. However, when the 4th thunder rune was formed, the flickering of the thunderlight did not stop. The thunderlight rapidly jumped on top of the 4th rune, and then, as the light seemed to warm up, another rune swiftly extended from it. The 5th thunder rune. Mu Chun's thunder god body had actually reached the level of the 5-rune thunder body. Boom. At the moment the 5th rune appeared, a surging black thunderlight erupted from Mu Chun's body, as if tidal waves pouring out from within him. His body seemed to rise half an inch, and his black eyes flickered with thunder, as if evolving into a world of lightning. An incredibly overwhelming power exploded from him, like a volcano. He lifted his head, gazing at the blood-red palm descending upon him, and slowly raised his own palm to meet it directly. Bang! The instant their palms made contact, the sound of thunder rang out across the sky. A black thunderbolt, like a pillar holding up the heavens, shot out. With a tremendous boom, it pierced through the blood-red palm, which contained an immense amount of spiritual power. The thunderlight shot into the sky, illuminating the land for hundreds of miles. Beneath the thunderlight, the blood-red palm quickly collapsed, eventually turning into a sea of crimson light points that scattered into the air. As the bloodlight dissipated, Mu Chen slowly raised his head, his eyes flashing with lightning as he looked at the somewhat grim-faced Blood Tiandu. He slowly said, "Prince of the Blood God clan, is that all?" The thunderlight streaked across the sky, and the blood palm gradually disappeared. Mu Chen hovered in the air, with black thunderlight crackling around his body. His eyes were cold as he stared at Blood Tiandu, immense power gathering rapidly in the palm of his hand. When he overcame the physical body tribulation, his Thunder God body had clearly advanced, reaching the 5-rune Thunder body level. With such a powerful body, Mu Chen now feared no one unless he encountered a master who had transcended the divine soul tribulation. Blood Tiandu, in terms of strength, was stronger than an average spiritual energy tribulation expert, but he had not truly crossed into the divine soul tribulation yet. So, if they were to engage in a one-on-one fight, Mu Chen would not fear him at all. Who is this arrogant fool, daring to challenge my Blood God clan? Blood Tiandu's eyes darkened with rage at Mu Chen's words, and bloodlight began to fill his body, a thick, bloody aura spreading in the air. His palm glowed with a scarlet light, sending out a dangerous wave of energy. Behind him, several others from the Blood God clan also emitted a cold, murderous aura, their bodies pulsing with bloodlight. Luo Li, noticing that the enemy was preparing to strike, turned coldly. Her jade hand gripped the Luo God sword, and a clear sword hum rang out, a sharp sword intent spreading. "If you're going to make a move, don't forget about us," when Chen Xi said, stepping forward with light movements. She smiled gently, and her jade hand grasped a magnificent golden battle spear. The spear's tip pointed sideways. Though she didn't directly target Blood Tiandu and his group, they could sense the faint, dangerous aura emanating from her. Su Huang, Xun'er, Luo, and the others also took their fighting stances, their eyes sharp as they watched Blood Tiandu's movements. The atmosphere became tense, as if a great battle was on the verge of breaking out. When Chen Xi, Blood Tiandu's eyes darkened as he looked at her. They had been participating in the Spiritual Academy Grand Competition for a while, so they were familiar with this first-ranked team. However, they hadn't expected her to be allied with Mu Chen. Indeed, when Chen Xi replied with a charming smile, but her eyes remained calm, as she gazed lightly at Blood Tiandu. Humph. Blood Tiandu's gaze flickered slightly, then a cold snort escaped his lips. When Chen Xi and the others had joined forces with Mu Chen, forming a formidable team, even they had to treat this situation carefully. If they engaged in direct combat, even if they won, they might have to pay a great price. Blood Tiandu clearly did not want that. "I'll let you off for now, but it looks like you're headed to a God Mountain as well?" "Very well, we'll settle things there in the ruins of the Wood Divine Hall." Blood Tiandu's eyes glowed coldly as he glanced at Mu Chen. As soon as the words left his mouth, he waved his hand, ready to retreat. Mu Chen's eyes flashed with coldness. He struck out with a palm, and a torrent of black and white spiritual energy immediately surged forward, heading straight for Xue Tiandu in an explosive blast. Clearly, he didn't want to let this guy leave so easily. "Although dealing with you is troublesome, if I want to leave, no matter how strong you are, you can't stop me." However, in response to Mu Chen's obstruction, Xue Tiandu sneered and immediately formed hand seals. Bloodlight spread out, and he let the spiritual energy torrent crash into their bodies. Boom. At the moment of contact, their bodies exploded, and blood mist filled the air. However, their figures strangely disappeared without a trace. Mu Chen squinted his eyes. When the bloodlight exploded, he faintly saw several flashes of bloodlight, clearly indicating that these people had used some special technique to escape, making it impossible for Mu Chen to intercept them. Though Xue Tiandu was irritating, he truly lived up to being the prince of the Blood God clan. Such an elusive method made it extremely difficult to stop him. "Are you also heading to the Divine Wood Temple ruins?" Cold light surged in Mu Chen's eyes. He indeed harbored some killing intent towards Xue Tiandu. The latter was from the Blood God clan, and would undoubtedly cause trouble for Luo Li in the future. So, if the opportunity arose, Mu Chen might make sure he never left this shattered relic continent. The black thunderous light on Mu Chen's body quickly faded away and finally dissipated as he swiftly flew back. This is the blood escape art of the Blood God clan, a powerful technique for escaping. But now, there's no need for us to engage in a big fight with them. We'll have other opportunities. Luo Li's frosty expression softened, and she smiled at Mu Chen. Mu Chen nodded. He gazed at the place where Xue Tiandu and his group had disappeared, falling into silent thought for a moment before saying, "Since they want to capture you, we can't let them leave." Hearing Mu Chen's words, Luo Li felt a sweet sensation in her heart. Wow, brother Mu Chen is so cool. Pin Air and Lu Air giggled beside them. Cool. We haven't even reached the Wood God Mountain, and now we've got another troublesome enemy. When Xingxian gave Mu Chen a sidelong glance and then lazily added, but at least he showed some backbone and didn't disappoint. If the women are being bullied and you hide behind, is that still a man? With her backhanded praise and criticism, Mu Chen could only smile helplessly. Compared to Xue Tiandu, he was clearly more concerned about the latter. Luo Li also smiled. Xue Tiandu is tricky, but if it comes to a fight, he won't escape unscathed. Hearing Luo Li defend Mu Chen, when Xingxian pouted her rosy lips, then waved her jade hand. We're almost at Trading Town. Hurry up, looks like a lot of people have gathered for this trip to the Wood God Mountain. There must be a lot of hidden experts among them. We should be prepared, because there will definitely be a great battle waiting for us in the ancient ruins. Mu Chen nodded as well. Just as when Xingxian had said, they hadn't even reached Wood God Mountain, and yet they already had another batch of troublesome opponents. Who knew how many more would appear by the time they arrived? It seemed that this time, the real battle would begin. Mu Chen was also curious, just how many hidden experts would reveal themselves this time. Everyone understood the true importance of the divine Wood Temple ruins. Therefore, those who had long been hiding their strength, waiting for the right moment, would surely show up. This time, it would undoubtedly be spectacular, even shaking the entire Spiritual Academy Grand Competition. Mu Chen and his group set off once more. In the distant plains, the outline of a small town could already be seen. Countless figures swept in from all directions and gathered in the town, creating a commotion and a lively atmosphere. Standing outside Trading Town, Mu Chen and the others couldn't help but marvel at the scene. Since entering the Spiritual Academy Grand Competition, they had rarely seen so many teams peacefully gathered together. Usually, when such a large number of teams appeared in one place, it would inevitably lead to fierce competition for scores. Let's go. When Xingxian seemed quite familiar with the place. With a wave of her hand, she took the lead, and Mu Chen and the others quickly followed. As they entered Trading Town, the bustling sounds hit them immediately. The town had only recently been established, and the wide bluestone streets looked particularly spacious. However, the streets were filled with bustling crowds. As Mu Chen and the others followed when Xingxian into the town, they immediately felt the noise subside somewhat. Of course, most of these gazes were directed at Wen Xingxian and Luo Li. Wen Xingxuan's fame had already spread throughout the entire Spiritual Academy Grand Competition. Everyone knew how powerful the team ranked first was, and was also aware of how beautiful the team's captain, the stunning beauty, was. However, what surprised them this time was that beside Wen Xingxian, they saw a girl who was just as remarkable as she was. Luo Li stood quietly to the side, holding the Luo God's sword with her jade-like hand. Her face was delicate, like a perfect piece of blue and white porcelain, calm and graceful. She was a stark contrast to Wen Xingxian in personality. The moment she entered the town, her clear eyes, as pure as glass, glanced over the crowd without any distraction. On the other hand, Wen Xingxian, with her equally breathtaking beauty, always wore a charming and alluring smile, making it hard for people to look away. Yet, while her smile was captivating, her phoenix eyes always carried a sense of pride. She would glance indifferently at some seemingly outstanding young men, and then move her gaze away, which immediately deflated the chests of those who had puffed them out in self-assurance. Compared to Luo Li, Wen Xingxian clearly exuded an untamable aura, but isn't that the way of men? The harder it is to win her over, the more they chase after her. Mu Chen glanced at the now quieter Trading Town and then at the countless eyes fixed on Luo Li. He couldn't help but pout in annoyance. In the midst of his irritation, Luo Li suddenly smiled faintly and took the initiative to extend her jade hand, grasping Mu Chen's hand. Her face flushed slightly. When Luo Li held Mu Chen's hand, a murmur of astonishment spread through the crowd. Many gazes turned toward Mu Chen, filled with undisguised hostility and jealousy. Mu Chen was also somewhat surprised. He knew Luo Li's personality. When the two were alone, he would occasionally act playfully, and she would shyly allow it. But in front of others, she appeared reserved, and things like her taking the initiative to hold his hand were rare. "This is a little reward for you," Luo Li said, glancing at Mu Chen with a slightly reddened face. Mu Chen couldn't help but smile. He knew she was referring to his decent performance earlier when facing Blood Tiandu. When Chen Xi took a step forward, but when she heard the murmurs around her, she glanced to the side and immediately understood what had happened. She softly snorted in her heart, her eyes turning, and her rosy lips curled up slightly. Because of the angle, Mu Chen happened to catch a glimpse of the curve of her lips and immediately had a bad feeling. Before he could react, when Chen Xi had already turned around gracefully, her face, as stunning as a national treasure, showing a captivating smile. But her eyes, though beautiful, held a hint of malice. Then, she unexpectedly reached out with her jade hand, grabbed Mu Chen's wrist, and led him directly toward the trading town. At that moment, the bustling noise in the trading town suddenly ceased. Mu Chen's back was already damp with cold sweat. If the earlier gazes were filled with hostility and jealousy, this time, the intent was unmistakably murderous. "Set up." Mu Chen's lips twitched slightly. When Chen Xi was simply a witch. Mu Chen and his group made their way into trading town, but as they walked, the once bustling noise gradually quieted. Many people widened their eyes as they watched this scene, which made their teeth itch with envy. When Qin Shuan's reputation was too grand, and everyone knew how difficult it was to tame this proud phoenix. Yet today, they witnessed this proud phoenix take the initiative to hold a boy's wrist. This scene made countless people's jaws drop, while their hearts were filled with undeniable jealousy. Where did this guy come from to gain when Qin Shuan's favor? Those piercing gazes seemed as if they were about to kill him. In the end, Mu Chen couldn't stand the overwhelming murderous looks anymore. He quickly took Wen Qingxuan's delicate, jade-like hand and pulled her into a nearby alley. Once they were in the alley, when Qin Xian hurriedly pulled her hand away from his grip, eyes wide as she stared at Mu Chen. Her expression was slightly annoyed as she gently wiped her cheek with her jade-like hand. She had a bit of a cleanliness obsession and absolutely disliked any direct physical contact with the opposite sex. Even earlier, when she had quietly grabbed Mu Chen's wrist covered by his sleeve, she had avoided touching his body directly. Who would have thought that Mu Chen would dare to grab her hand in return? If Luo Li hadn't been standing nearby, she probably wouldn't have been able to resist the urge to strike Mu Chen right then. I haven't even asked you what you're doing. Next time you pull something like that, could you at least ask for my and Luo Li's consent first? Mu Chen said, curling his lips. You clearly took advantage of me, when Qin Xian replied, her anger rising. This guy, taking advantage and still acting innocent. Thanks, but I'm not interested in such a thing. Mu Chen responded sharply, and then he pulled Luo Li away toward the deeper parts of Trading Town. Luo Li shrugged her delicate shoulders helplessly at Wen Qin Xian, who was visibly annoyed. Although she had been somewhat surprised by Wen Qingxuan's earlier behavior, she clearly didn't want to say too much. She could tell that Wen Qin Xian didn't seem to have the same feelings for Mu Chen as other girls did, and likewise, Mu Chen probably viewed her only as a partner for collaboration. When Qin Xian looked at their retreating figures, unable to suppress her frustration, she ground her silver teeth and stomped her foot. Beside her, Pin-Er and Lu-Er discreetly averted their gazes, too afraid to provoke Wen Qin Xian. They had been shocked when they saw her grab Mu Chen's wrist earlier. They knew her well enough to understand that since the Spiritual Academy Grand Competition began, they had encountered many strong teams attempting to approach them, but Wen Qin Xian had always maintained a distance from those equally talented young men. Although she smiled charmingly, there was an unmistakable resistance hidden beneath that smile, keeping others at arm's length. But now, this woman who disliked physical contact with the opposite sex had taken the initiative to grab a boy's wrist. How could that not shock them? Remember this. When Qin Xian muttered through gritted teeth before quickly following behind. Having learned from her previous mistake, when Qin Xian didn't dare repeat the same behavior. Instead, she kept a distance of 3 steps from Mu Chen, her beautiful face expressionless, though it was clear she was still somewhat vexed. However, Mu Chen didn't pay much attention to her, instead curiously surveying his surroundings. On either side of the wide bluestone street, there were simple shops with people coming and going. The atmosphere was bustling, showing that this trade point, although newly established, was thriving. For every team participating in the Spiritual Academy Grand Competition, such places were essential. On this shattered relic continent, there were many ancient ruins scattered across, and some of them contained treasures that had been left behind from ancient times. Although these ruins were usually hidden, they would eventually be discovered. However, the treasures found weren't always useful to the person who discovered them. Thus, the appearance of trading towns like this one made sense. Here, they could trade treasures they didn't need for the ones they required. After wandering for several minutes, Mu Chen and the others finally stopped in front of a massive pavilion, which seemed to be the largest building in Trading Town. The bustling energy inside was palpable. Inside the pavilion were various shops, each displaying a wide array of goods. Spiritual light flickered, and waves of unique spiritual energy radiated from these items, which clearly had an ancient feel, likely extracted from those ancient ruins. Mu Chen observed with interest, while Chen Xi walked ahead, scanning the shops in search of the spiritual pills she needed. There were many spiritual pills here, and their faint fragrance made it hard to resist casting covetous glances. However, spiritual pills were a luxury for most people in this place. Bartering was the main method of exchange, and because spiritual pills could be easily counterfeited, those unfamiliar with them might end up buying fakes. Thus, only a few could afford to buy the genuine ones. When Qing Xuan's gaze swept over the jade bottles filled with strong spiritual energy, the pills inside were clearly visible, but what puzzled Mu Chen was that she wasn't searching for the pills with the richest spiritual energy, those that practically radiated with power. Instead, her gaze was fixed on some of the more ordinary-looking pills. Finally, her eyes landed on a slightly damaged jade bottle. This is a spirit pill I found in an ancient ruin. I've tried it myself, and it works quite well for recovering spiritual energy, the slim young man selling the pill said, quickly introducing it as when Qing Xuan's gaze turned towards him. When Qin Xian gracefully took the jade vial from him, pouring out a spirit pill. The pill was dark green in color, round like a dragon's eye, though the intensity of spiritual energy within seemed less potent compared to the ones she had seen before. How much? When Qin Xian asked, her interest piqued. 2 top-grade spiritual artifacts, 1 offensive spiritual artifact, and 1 defensive spiritual artifact, the slim young man replied immediately. Mu Chen raised an eyebrow. That's quite an expensive price. There were only 5 pills in the jade vial, yet this guy was asking for 2 top-grade spiritual artifacts in exchange. Spirit pills are truly a luxury. When Qin Xian hesitated for a moment before nodding, she waved her hand at the quiet girl named Inya, who promptly waved her jade hand, sending 2 streaks of light flying from her fingers toward the slim young man. He caught them quickly, carefully inspecting them, and his face immediately lit up with surprise. When Qin Xian didn't say anything further, grabbing the jade vial and turning to leave. Those 5 spirit pills are worth that much? Mu Chen couldn't help but ask as he followed behind. Though he wasn't the one being taken advantage of, those 2 top-grade spiritual artifacts could certainly enhance the combat power of Su Huang and the others. You don't understand, when Qin Xian glanced at him, saying, these spirit pills should be Qing Ling pills. Not only do they help restore spiritual energy quickly, but they also temporarily enhance physical strength. To be honest, their value is far greater than what we just paid. Enhance physical strength? Mu Chen was surprised. But to achieve that effect, they need to be taken in combination with another type of pill, when Qin Xian added. That guy has no idea about this. It was clear that when Qin Xian had far more knowledge of spirit pills than Mu Chen. She clenched her hand, and 2 round spirit pills appeared in her palm. Also, did you see? These spirit pills have lotus spirit patterns on them, which is the mark of the Pill God clan. This means these pills came from the Pill God clan. Pill God clan? Mu Chen blinked in confusion. Clueless, when Qin Xian said lightly. In today's vast world, there are 3 places that produce the highest quality spirit pills. The Pill God clan is one of them. The other is the ancient myriad grass plains, and the third is the endless fire domain. The first 2 have centuries of tradition, while the endless fire domain rose to prominence later. The Flame Emperor, who hails from a lower dimension, has a unique pill-making technique. His pills are so precious that even supreme-level powerhouses seek them but can't obtain them. This is one of the key reasons the endless fire domain became such a powerful force in such a short time. The Flame Emperor is impressive, Mu Chen marveled. When Qin Xian glanced at him and gently curled her red lips, saying, though I haven't met the Flame Emperor, I once had a brief encounter with his daughter. Maybe I could introduce you to her sometime. Mu Chen awkwardly ignored her, choosing not to respond. When Qin Xian flicked her finger, sending 2 Qingling pills toward Mu Chen and Luo Li. She smiled at Luo Li and said, "Don't refuse. Once we enter with God Mountain, we'll likely face many battles. The stronger your strength, the higher our chances of success in obtaining treasure." Luo Li hesitated for a moment before smiling and nodding. "Thank you, Chen Xi." Hearing Luo Li's address, when Qing Xuan's smile softened, a stark contrast to her previous demeanor when speaking to Mu Chen. Mu Chen accepted the spirit pills with a helpless shake of his head. "One can't eat without feeling indebted. Let's go. We've got the spirit pills." When Qin Xian waved her hand at the group, preparing to leave, Mu Chen nodded, but just as he was about to move, his expression shifted. He turned his head towards the depths of the pavilion, where he sensed some unusual fluctuations.